Every year, the fantasy football community thinks they know everything. They think that the first round is the first round, and we have the fantasy football groupthink collaborative first round of ADP, and nobody ever says anything. Nobody ever challenges it. Nobody says, hey, how come this guy is going over this guy? Today, we're going to be breaking down the first round of ADP, really digging into the cases, the pros, the cons for these players, because it goes without saying, they're going in the first round of fantasy drafts. We all know they're great players, but what is going to separate league winners from guys who underperform potentially are the pros and cons of these guys, and us deciding whether or not they belong to go this high. And in our opinion, there are some glaring mistakes in ADP right now. And quick disclaimer before I introduce you, Danny, here is we are doing this from a PPR standpoint, home redraft leagues, and then also you could apply this to underdog fantasy drafts as well, because we are more like in PPR, it's going to be heavy on the wide receivers, a little bit lighter on the running backs. But if you're in standard, half PPR, casual home leagues, leave us down below any questions or comments, and we'll tell you kind of how our rankings would change based on your league format. So, Danny, we should kick this thing off. This is a fun topic, and honestly, shout out to the underdog guys because they thought of this first, and I thought it was a genius idea that I wanted to do it as well.
Yeah, and just going back to the purpose of this video, the first round is wrong. At the end of the day, you're going to hear a lot, oh, that ADP is fine, like this range of players is so good. Like, no, like when you are on the clock at each of these picks and you are faced with the decision, bullets are flying in the chamber, you have to add one to your home league, to your work league, to your family league. Who are you drafting? And that's what the exercise we put ourselves into when we made these rankings. These top 12s, quite frankly, at every single spot, were us examining all the potential options, which is the clear best option in our opinion, and basically explaining the case for why we have them over those certain players. Again, there's a lot of context. This is still a great first round at the end of the day, but you have to take stances in fantasy football, and this video is basically us taking our stances on our first 12 players.
Yeah, so let's get right into it. Let's start with the first tier of players. So we are going to kind of do this like tier maker format like we usually would with like a top 24 or top 36, but we really want to go like round by round and really dissect these guys in depth because, like you said, when the bullets are flying, you got to make a decision. So 101, if you get the 101 in a PPR redraft league or, a wide receiver heavy kind of format like you and I are accustomed to playing, we're both going with the same guy. So people are going to call you biased because they see the Cowboys jerseys behind you. But I also have CeeDee Lamb at 101 as the guy that if I was tasked with picking at 101 in a PPR league, I would select CeeDee Lamb. So I'll let you make the case for him.
Yeah, so like you said, both of our 101s, ADP right now currently going off the board as the second overall player on Underdog. And if you take a look at the ADP aggregate across drafts in the last couple of months ago, it was a stark difference. CMC was the 101. There was a big difference between, his 1.2 ADP versus CeeDee Lamb's 2.4 ADP, I believe is about where the range was. We've currently seen the gap very much narrow, and we've seen CeeDee Lamb go a lot more at the 101. And to me, the reason why he's the 101 is that he checks all of the boxes we look for a top-end fantasy asset. You'll get through the risk ratings in a second, but I mean, if you're just talking about the talent itself, elite NFL wide receiver, fourth highest PFF receiving grade, sixth highest yards per route run in the NFL, 197 commanded targets, with arguably the best situation for an elite receiver. Why I say best situation overall is that a lot of these elite receivers are going to have, very good offenses. We're going to talk about Tyreek Hill in a second, Ja'Marr Chase, high-end projectable offenses. But the reason why Dallas is so unique is that despite the top-end offensive projection, there's no real clear-cut number two behind CeeDee Lamb. And if you look at the ADP over on Underdog, the second, the third, the fourth selected Dallas player, night and day compared to where some of the other top offenses are going. Like, for example, with CeeDee Lamb, he's the 101. After him, Dak, Ferguson, Brandon Cooks, Jalen Tolbert, all going comparatively down the board. Whereas, for example, with Miami, you have HN and Waddle. With, the Cincinnati Bengals, you have Burrow going high. You have, T. Higgins going high. You have, the two running backs going a little bit higher than the Cowboys running backs. With the Cowboys situation, the market expects CeeDee Lamb to be the clear one in that offense. And looking at the surrounding talent, you see as to why. Again, Jake Ferguson, great player. Brandon Cook, solid player as well. Jalen Tolbert maybe takes a step. But it's clear as day that CeeDee Lamb is the offensive engine. And despite being expected to dominate his offensive volume, there's no evident negative impact on the offense with that being the case. We see a lot of volume receivers in the NFL with, negative offenses, a la the Devontae Adams Las Vegas Raiders last year. Simply put, a lot of offenses, when they're so concentrated on one receiver, typically aren't as strong as the Cowboys projection. Whereas with the Cowboys, like you said, CeeDee Lamb can get 200 targets. They can be a top 5% offense, and everything is clicking in that regard. High win total, high point differential last year, high EPA per play, red zone touchdown rate is something that was actually lacking at the early portion of the year. We saw was able to take command after the bye week. And this is a guy after the Cowboys bye week that not only was the highest scoring player in fantasy, he was quite frankly lapping the field. He was averaging nearly 28 PPR points per game. So in terms of Lamb, 25 years old, prime of his career, great offensive projection, elite NFL wide receiver. There's really no holes to poke in this projection.
Yeah, I mean, he's in his prime. Injury, age, risk, not really concerning. Pass volume will be high in this offense. They're going to throw the ball. They have nobody to run it right now. They're not going to be super exciting on the ground. The talent, like you said, he's one of the best receivers in the league. Quarterback play, was an MVP candidate last year. Positional competition, extremely low. The upside is a legendary season, 24, 25 points per game. Yeah. The median projection is probably a top 5 wide receiver, and his absolute floor, let's say, on the 5% chance that the Cowboys just aren't as good as we think they're going to be because they don't have a lot of ancillary pieces, or maybe Lamb is banged up or Dak is banged up or something like that. His floor is a wide receiver 1 still. So for me, Lamb is also my 101, and we're making reference to our risk ratings. You see our contextualized game logs, all of that coming from our draft guide, which you can see on the screen. You can get for free with a $10 underdog sign up, and that'll be linked down below in the description. You mentioned that CeeDee Lamb is lapping the field post Cowboys bye week. Well, part of the reason he was lapping the field is because our 102 was dealing with injuries himself, and that's Tyreek Hill, wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins. This is the most absurd stat I've ever read about a wide receiver, but in 9 of the first 12 games last year, Tyreek Hill had over 25 fantasy points in 75% of the first 12 games last year. He was a top 5 receiver in 9 of 12 weeks, and he averaged 26.1 PPR points per game before that Tennessee Titans game when he suffered an ankle injury and wasn't quite the same guy down the stretch. 4 PPR points per game higher than CeeDee Lamb was averaging in that period of time. Imagine getting a guy whose median projection on a given week is like 100 yards and a touchdown every single game. For me, you guys might be wondering, how do you not have Christian McCaffrey at 101? How do you not have him at 102? It's just that these receivers are that good. We have Christian McCaffrey, spoiler alert, at 103. It's just that CeeDee Lamb and Tyreek Hill in PPR formats, again, huge disclaimer, are better bets.
Yeah, and going back to Tyreek Hill, people might be questioning, Waddle was banged up during the year. Maybe that was when, Tyreek Hill was eaten in fantasy. Well, when you just specifically take the splits where Waddle played over 50% of the snaps, aka the games where Waddle was fully healthy in, Tyreek Hill, 27.24% target share, 24.2 PPR points per game, a 42.47% receiving yards market share, elite territory. On top of the fact that the guy was averaging, get this, 4.571 yards per route run. Yes, he was banged up times in games. He wasn't playing full snaps, 64.73% of the snaps. But when he was running a route, 4.57 yards per route run. Absurd. We're talking about legitimately one of the most efficient receiver seasons we've ever seen.
Yeah, he literally led all receivers in receiving grade, led all receivers in yards per route run. If you're worried, oh, what if he falls off? He's a little bit older. I'm like, if he falls off because he's a little bit older, I will take my L because we have 100%. Absolutely no evidence that he's anywhere close to falling off.
And quite frankly, I mean, if he was, 26, 27, 28 years old, obviously he's a little bit older now. You could make the case him and CeeDee Lamb. You could still make the case now.
One if he was 26 years old.
But that's what I'm saying. It's like the only reason he's even 102, again, behind CeeDee Lamb, I think it'd be a 50-50. It's because of the age, because him and McCaffrey comparatively to CeeDee Lamb being a prime player, Hill and McCaffrey being older players. So that is the tiebreaker difference. Again, the reason why they're in the 101 worthy tier is that whether you have McCaffrey one, whether you have Hill one, whether you're like us, you have CeeDee Lamb one, they are all rightful options to be the top selected player in your draft. So love that with Tyreek Hill.
One last point on Tyreek Hill, because I actually will make the case that he could be 101 even despite the age right now. The only reason that you can maybe make the argument that he's 101 is, like I said, that 5-10% scenario that CeeDee Lamb and the Cowboys maybe aren't quite as good as they are. Dude, the way that the Miami Dolphins scheme up offense is unlike anybody else in the NFL. Dwayne McFarland and a number of other guys that are really heavily tapped into how schemes are running and that kind of thing have talked about the importance of motion and play action plays. And at the top of all of those lists are the Miami Dolphins. So the types of targets, one 7-yard slant pass in the New Orleans Saints offense is worth significantly less than one 7-yard slant pass in the Miami Dolphins offense, the way that they scheme up plays.
Yeah, and I mean, if you're going to point out CeeDee Lamb's 5 to 10% downside, I will point to the fact that the age complex, the overall snap share he's been playing comparatively to a guy like CeeDee Lamb playing every snap, is a concern. Again, elite efficiency, he's still my 102, but that's the main reason why I have Lamb at my 101. Let's move on to the 103 for both of us. Christian McCaffrey, running back from the San Francisco 49ers, the ADP 101 overall, and I get it. He is absolutely 101 worthy. If you are a running back truther and you want Christian McCaffrey to be your RB1, I have no complaints if you wanted to take him at that overall selection. The biggest reason why I have him at 3 and behind these 2 wide receivers simply isn't to do with McCaffrey himself, like you said. It has to do with the fact that Lamb and Tyreek Hill are so elite at the wide receiver position. And structurally, in this current market climate, I favor starting with an early wide receiver more than I do with a running back. Again, like I prefaced at the top of the video, this is about when you're on the clock and you have to put your finger to the draft button, who you're selecting. And I just can't personally do McCaffrey over these 2 wide receivers. Again, I'm playing a lot of best ball teams. I'll mix in McCaffrey at 101, 102 because you're dealing with a big portfolio. But if I'm in my big money draft or if I'm in my home league draft with all my friends I've been playing with for the last 10 years and I get the 101, 102, I'm not going to be selecting McCaffrey. Again, he checks all of the boxes of an elite RB1. And the funniest stat I was able to come up with when I went through his truth series is that despite, having all these weapons on the outside, people will point, too many mouths to feed, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, lower volume offense as a whole with Kyle Shanahan. At the end of the day, when the Niners were fully healthy, it was CMC that was punching in all of these drives. 1.2 touchdowns per game in the stretch where everyone was healthy, and he was scoring over 25 PPR points per game. We know what he was able to do as an elite receiver. I mean, he's arguably one of the best receiving backs in NFL history. But CMC's game in between the tackles has really developed since he landed with the Niners. Again, this is a guy that led the NFL in red zone carries last year, and he punched in 9 touchdowns from inside the 5-yard line. We know, like you said, with the Miami Dolphins, we can expect a big-time scheme advantage for the Dolphins players. We can say the exact same when it comes to running backs playing in that Shanahan San Francisco 49ers scheme. At the end of the day, again, the same risk that we had for him last year still exists. The big difference for me, though, is that despite the age and touch apex, I'm just more willing to click the CMC button knowing that he's able to have a legendary season. That was the main question that people had last year was, with the volume, potentially being down in San Francisco, Elijah Mitchell going into this year, guys like Isaac Orendo, is he going to get a workhorse role? And we saw the Niners' true intentions with McCaffrey last year, despite being an older running back. On top of that, they just extended him to the most RB money in the NFL this offseason.
Yeah, again, for me, Christian McCaffrey has the most downside risk. That's why he's
absolutely
3, because his touch workload and his age, again, I'm not fading him for those reasons. Like, I'm still happy to draft Christian McCaffrey, and I'm not going to doubt a future Hall of Famer like Christian McCaffrey's ability to continue to be great, even though the data says he should be falling off, because he's clearly an outlier. It's very, very clear to me that he doesn't apply to the rest of this data. However, Father Time is undefeated, and the 49ers offensive line is one Trent Williams injury away from potentially being a bit of a liability to their offense. So again, those 2 reasons are the reasons that he is behind Tyreek Hill and CeeDee Lamb, who in my opinion, they're all legendary 25 point per game upside players. I would be happy to have a top 3 pick. And in fact, I do in my home league. And I initially had it, traded down to 6, realized how good a top 3 pick was, and traded back up yesterday.
Hey, if I remember correctly, when you made the initial trade down, I told you you're going to regret that. So good on you for getting back in that top 3.
Well, thank God the guy that I traded with was like, yeah, I'm actually totally cool picking at number 6. And you know what? Let's transition to the next tier, because he absolutely totally should be cool with picking number 6, because there are so many good players at the top of fantasy drafts this year. These top 8 guys are unbelievably talented. All of them have a case to have monster seasons. If you're wondering how good is the first round this year, the biggest takeaway from this video is that the top 8 selections are extremely, extremely strong. And these mid first round guys, Ja'Marr Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Bijan Robinson, Justin Jefferson, and Breece Hall, all have legendary upside guys. I will start with my 104 because he is not your 104. So we're going to have a lot more disagreement in this area than we just did. I have Amon-Ra St. Brown as my 104 right now. And Is he a better receiver than Justin Jefferson and Ja'Marr Chase in real life? No, I don't think he is. I think he is a inferior talent to those guys. However, in fantasy football, I believe he projects better. We're talking home, PPR, redraft leagues, and, best ball wide receiver heavy landscapes. Matt Harmon has detailed that Amon-Ra St. Brown came into the NFL as an elite zone beater. As his career has progressed, he has gotten so much better against man coverage per his reception perception detail. And even though he's not the best downfield wide receiver that you're going to get in this area, Chase, of course, monster downfield production, Justin Jefferson, monster downfield production, he has absolutely no holes to poke in his profile this year. You look at his offense, it's going to be one of the best in the NFL. Him and Jared Goff, elite connection. The scheme rewards Amon-Ra St. Brown over the middle of the field. If Jameson Williams takes a step forward this year, guess what? That's going to open up the field again for Amon-Ra St. Brown. If Sam Laporta is very good at seam busting and still has a great breakout season this year after already having the best tight end season for a rookie in 50 years, it's still going to help Amon-Ra. He is still the number one guy here. 10 touchdowns, 1,500 yards last year. I can't poke a hole in this guy's game. And for me, in the first round, when all of these top 8 players are so freaking good and all could be 25 point per game scores this year, I'm taking the one with the least risk because the ceilings are all elite, the medians are all elite, and the downside risk is the lowest, in my opinion, for Amon-Ra St. Brown.
Yeah, and like I mentioned at the top, Amon-Ra is my 106. I still very much love Amon-Ra St. Brown. At the end of the day, though, like you'll see when I get into my 104 and 105, I just can't click the button on Amon-Ra over the legendary wide receiver upside that I see from a guy like Ja'Marr Chase and a guy like Justin Jefferson. I mean, I'll get into, Justin Jefferson in a second. Let me just quickly go into Ja'Marr Chase, the ADP 104, my 104 rank. You said you have him ranked, 107, right? Or 106?
I have him 10. Hold on. Let me check one. I'm 105. 105.
105. Okay. So it'll be pretty easy to make the case. Again, you're picking, needles here when you're comparing Chase, Jefferson, Amon-Ra, as we'll get into as well with the 2 other running backs. I mean, it's just such a strong tier. But with Ja'Marr Chase, the reason why he is my bet for 4th overall player is that he's simply shown to be the best of both worlds, an elite wide receiver talent, and that when his quarterback is healthy, he has high-end quarterback play and a great offensive potential. Again, assuming health from both him, assuming health from both Joe Burrow. We've known Ja'Marr Chase as, the big-time, big play ball winner, big plays down the field, 40 yards here, 50 yards here, 60 yards here. He has that type of play upside that, simply put, some of the wide receivers in this range don't have. But he's also quietly developed into quite the separator per Matt Harmon's reception perception. You mentioned with Amon-Ra St. Brown taking big strides as a separator. Same thing with Ja'Marr Chase. He kind of entered as a raw route runner coming into the NFL. We've seen him fully develop into a true 3-level stud. 82nd percentile against man, 79th percentile against zone, 91st percentile against press. Again, 26% of his routes in 2023 he was pressed. 91 percentile rate at beating it. Very, very good there. The big issue for Ja'Marr Chase in 2023, admittedly, was the health of Joe Burrow. Entering the season with that calf strain, I mean, it looked like in the offseason that Joe Burrow was going to suffer a torn ACL. Ended up being a calf strain, looked like a really bad one. He came into the year, did not look like the same Joe Burrow we were accustomed to being. Heck, I'm pretty sure in week 1, he actually put up negative fantasy points. Again, you could fact check me on that, but it was not pretty. If you drafted Joe Burrow last year, you would know that he started the year as a complete 0. He was a quarterback 3 in fantasy. He wasn't giving you any production. On top of that, of course, we remember that Thursday night game where he injured his wrist, ended up missing the rest of the season. We didn't see the top level, 5-level quarterback we've grown accustomed to seeing from Joe Burrow. And quite frankly, his deep accuracy, the area him and Ja'Marr Chase have been the most dominant at attacking since their days at LSU, simply didn't exist last year per Derek Clausen's charting over on reception perception. Obviously, Matt does the wide receivers, Derek does the quarterbacks. You'll see here that Joe Burrow attacking the 3rd level of the field, 20 plus yards down the field, 25% to the left side of the field, 33.3% to the center of the field. And like we said, we know Ja'Marr Chase, this big time ball winner, this big time big play threat. Joe Burrow not being able to throw the deep ball definitely took its impact on Ja'Marr Chase's bottom line. And even despite this, again, when we isolate out the first 4 weeks when Joe Burrow was a complete non-factor and isolate the games after when Joe Burrow got hurt, when Joe Burrow was in his healthy portion of the year, Ja'Marr Chase commanded a near 30% target share and 24.6 PPR points per game. Again, small sample, big-time blow-up game in the sample, but as we've seen from Ja'Marr Chase historically, these big time blow up games, while some people will point to as volatility and, every now and then it's happening, Chase is one of the most consistent receivers in the league at having a 30 plus, 35 plus spike week potential. Like we talk about with Tyreek Hill being able to win you a week in the zone, Ja'Marr Chase has that level of ceiling. To me, again, 2022 marred by Ja'Marr Chase injuries. 2023, it was Burrow injuries. At some point, we will see this legendary connection have a 1,800, 1,900 yard, 15 plus touchdown projection. Again, with Joe Burrow, he's one of the few quarterbacks in the league we can confidently say, when healthy, project for over 4,500 yards and 30 to 35 plus passing touchdowns. And Ja'Marr Chase is the level of elite wide receiver talent that, simply put, once those top three are off the board, given the combination of all these factors, I can't pass on at the fourth position.
Yeah, so I think you did a great. I think everybody knows what the ceiling looks like for Chase and Burrow. It looks like a monster 40 touchdown from Burrow, 18 touchdown season from Ja'Marr Chase. T. Higgins, of course, we know he's going to command his targets. He's been banged up. The difference between St. Brown and Chase, because obviously I have St. Brown higher, is that I think St. Brown, A, has been healthier throughout his career, which is something that's also a factor. And B, I don't have to worry about his quarterback having a very rare wrist injury coming into the season. So that is the tiebreaker between Ja'Marr Chase and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Am I overly concerned about Joe Burrow's injury? Not really, but I'm not concerned at all about Jared Goff being injured. So that's the difference. And I also think that T. Higgins is a better target earner, a better target commander, and a better receiver overall than anybody else on the Lions. As much as I love Sam Laporta, and I think he can have a monster season, when you're competing directly for downfield wide receiver targets and red zone targets like Higgins and Chase are, I think it has a more bigger impact on Ja'Marr Chase's bottom line. But again, he's my 105. He's still a superstar, and I still would take him with a top 5 pick. I just prefer St. Brown.
Yeah, and I mean that's definitely fair. I'm definitely more of a ceiling chaser. Like you said, you like the safety that Amon-Ra projects. At the end of the day, Chase is just a little bit more volatile overall, like you said, comparatively to a guy like Amon-Ra. I think he's got an evidently higher ceiling, given the fact that if Joe Burrow's playing at an MVP level, Chase is fully healthy. He's one of the few receivers that can put up, like you said, 1,900 plus, 18 receiving touchdowns in a single season. Again, simply put, Joe Burrow is the type of quarterback that if you told me that Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen weren't going to lead the league in passing touchdowns next year, my next bet would be on a guy like Joe Burrow or a guy like Dak Prescott, a guy like Jordan Love, CJ Stroud. There's a few quarterbacks every year that we can safely project for a high amount of touchdowns. And to me, Joe Burrow, if he had 43 passing touchdowns, nobody would be shocked.
Yeah. The other minor risk that I would point to with Ja'Marr Chase, and again, remember, these are PPR rankings, and St. Brown has 2 100-plus reception seasons. Chase has one of them. And the other risk that I would point to is that the Bengals did lose their offensive coordinator, and it's possible that they don't throw the ball quite as much as they've been throwing it with Brian Callahan. Or
I'll argue that.
Taylor, do any of us think he's like an elite schemer of plays up? Like, it's possible that schematically they can't match the Detroit Lions, or of course like the Dolphins or 49ers, or some of these great schemed up offenses, and Burrow, Chase, and Higgins have to do it all themselves, which Dwayne McFarland, a number of other guys have pointed out they are doing, by the way. Apparently the Bengals are just, their stars are so good that they're carrying bad play calling. They never run play action. They never run jet motion. They never do anything to make it easier on their stars, which if they did, Chase might have already had a couple of these seasons where he has 18 touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, it just kind of boils back to the fact that the same receiver we saw, break out as a rookie, again, limited overall volume, but the high explosive, high big play total hasn't really been kind of connected. Again, we've seen him develop as a full-time volume player in these last couple of years. But whether it's his injury or whether it's with Joe Burrow's, we haven't seen both worlds kind of connect with the elite efficiency 2021 year met with the volume he's seen. The way I contextualize it is Ja'Marr Chase in the next couple of years is going to have a wide receiver 1 overall finish, and it could very well be this year, assuming health from both those guys.
Yeah, especially knowing that he's fighting for $35-40 million a year contract that he's going to be up for after this season. It would make sense that it does come this year. But as I mentioned, those are my concerns. Again, I'm not overly worried about it. I have him at 105. Let's talk about the running backs. Actually, no, let's talk about Jefferson, because you have Jefferson ahead of me. I actually do have both running backs ahead of Jefferson. And do I feel comfortable having Justin Jefferson 108? Absolutely not. I do not have him. I do not feel comfortable about that.
You should.
I will make the bear case for Justin Jefferson, why he's my 108. You obviously are going to make the most common bull case that everybody knows about Justin Jefferson. The bear case for him, and why I have the running backs ahead of him, and we'll talk about those guys in a second, is that Justin Jefferson, while he is probably one of the best receivers I've ever witnessed with my own eyes, and the best receiver, pound for pound in the NFL, in my opinion. CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Ja'Marr Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, I feel very comfortable with their quarterback situation and with their offensive projection. Kevin O'Connell's a great coach. I think he's going to do a great job at developing J.J. McCarthy. And Sam Darnold, you'll probably see the best play of his entire career, most likely, in this offense.
Agreed.
For however many games we get Sam Darnold. But the way that home redraft PPR leagues work is when you're at the beginning of your fantasy football season and it's week 1, it's week 2, it's week 3, and everybody's overreacting to what's happening right now, I just simply think that the Vikings might have a slow start. And it's also possible that they never really get their bearings because it's challenging when you're going through a quarterback change midway through the season. J.J. McCarthy is a raw rookie who, if he comes in week 6, might have some growing pains. That all being said, I recognize there's a possibility that J.J. McCarthy is just much better than we're all maybe anticipating him to be, and Kevin O'Connell's scheme can cover a lot of this up. And also, more importantly, it doesn't matter because Justin Jefferson's simply that good, and he'll produce with whatever quarterback he has. So I recognize that's all true. It's not a bear case against Justin Jefferson. It's simply a tiebreaker for other elite players around him.
It's more so the bull case that this damn tier is so damn talented that I will just avoid the one with the most concerns of his offense. I understand that, and I completely agree if the overall talent level of all these guys was on an even plane. But when it comes to Justin Jefferson, he is my 105. His ADP's overall 105. I simply can't pass on this absurd talent level. And we're not just talking about arguably the best receiver in the NFL. We're talking about quite literally, arguably the greatest wide receiver of all time. At the end of the day, there is the legit possibility that once Justin Jefferson laces up his cleats, retires from the NFL, he is the best wide receiver of all time. In his first 4 years in the NFL, 60 games played, nearly 100 yards per game. He's been a 98.3 yard per game receiver. The next closest in NFL history is Calvin Johnson at 86.1. We're not just talking about a guy, like I said, who is in contention for wide receiver 1 in the league. We're mentioning a guy that's in contention for wide receiver 1 of all time. He averaged, like I said, 12.2 more yards per game than anybody else. And that was including an injury-riddled year this year where he spent the last 4 games coming back from injury playing with Nick Mullins. And again, we mentioned quarterback play potentially being an issue. When he came back with Nick Mullins, he looked like the same Justin Jefferson we've seen of old. Again, small sample size. I know you'll point to that in a second, but 22.1 PPR points per game in that stretch. And again, that's not to say that he can suffice with terrible quarterback play across 17 games. It's more so just understanding contextually that the quarterback play from McCarthy or Darnold is more likely to be in the middle between Kirk Cousins and Nick Mullins than straight up at Nick Mullins' level. And regardless, like I said, that gives more credence to the fact that Justin Jefferson just may be QB proof. At the end of the day, again, Sam Darnold, J.J. McCarthy, I view as an upgrade over Nick Mullins, and he was putting up league-winning type of production with Mullins. When I'm ranking these players at the end of the day, these key components in this decision-making comes down to the fact that if I pass on a player, how bad can they burn me if they hit their highest ceiling potential? Justin Jefferson has the opportunity to make me look completely dumb if he hits and he's the first overall player in fantasy. There is a legit possibility in the next 5-6 years, the 105 ADP we're getting Jefferson at right now is by far the cheapest. This is a guy that if we were positive that his quarterback situation was fully set, not only would be in the top 3 overall tier with Jefferson or with McCaffrey, with Lamb, with Hill, you can make the case as being the 101 overall, like we just did this past season. Again, he got hurt during the year. He played with bad quarterback play, and you would still argue on a per-game basis he was well worth that 101 that we were spending on him. This is a special talent, and I simply can't pass on hitting the draft button when I'm at 105 on him.
Yeah, and to be fair, between him and the running backs, it would be very league dependent. If you're in a league that very much values running backs and you're going to be confident in the wide receivers that come back to you, I would take the running backs at that point. But if you're in a league format where the running backs are going to slide, then go ahead and take Justin Jefferson. So again, I'm going to use your Ja'Marr Chase argument against you because on Justin Jefferson, we saw Chase run cold and things never line up. I believe that this season may be a blip on the radar in a downside risk scenario for an otherwise future Hall of Fame wide receiver in Justin Jefferson. This season could be a wide receiver 6 in points per game. Nobody's going to be upset with that. You get a top 6 wide receiver. I just think that the other guys' median and downside risks are a little bit better than Justin Jefferson. So that is why I'm slightly fading him. And you mentioned, I don't want to be the guy that passes on Justin Jefferson and look like the idiot who ranked him too low. But guess what? It kills you more in the first round to not get a locked and loaded top 5 guy than it does to swing on an upside player and miss. If you swing on an upside player and miss, again, that's going to kill you hard. But I want the guy that just projects the best. And to me, he projects the 8th best of all the players.
There's a difference between taking a guy based off his talent versus taking a guy who may be the best at his position of all time. That's what
100%. Again, I'm never going to hear me say a bad word about Justin Jefferson, the player. There's other factors. We've seen DeAndre Hopkins 100%. Have a down season in his career. We've seen Julio Jones in his prime have a down season in his career. There's players that can be elite future Hall of Fame wide receivers who have a blip on the radar season, and we're trying to get ahead of it for Ja'Marr Chase, where he has that monster breakout season. We never get him this cheap again. I'm trying to get ahead of it with Justin Jefferson, where if he has this like down blip on the radar season, I don't want to be the guy who spent that high pick on him.
At the end of the day, I'm making a pick to hit, not to not miss. And with Justin Jefferson,
that's totally fair. But I think you could argue that he will be great, but not elite this year. Is my attitude towards him.
It's all circumstantial reasoning, trying to analyze the situation, the downgrade at quarterback from Cousins to other options, when in actuality, objectively, he was very, very productive despite the quarterback position at the end of the year. So what it boils down to me, I get that. It's small sample, and I completely understand that. But at the end of the day, he, to this sample at this current point, has shown to be quarterback proof. He has. And quite frankly,
you're right. Again, I don't want to fade him. I don't. I really don't.
Man.
Like, he scares the shit out of me for fading him. He really scares the living daylights out of me. But let's get into the running backs because we got to talk about these guys. Go ahead.
Last thing I'll say, comment down below, Team Jefferson, Team Amon-Ra in the comment section, because that was a big decision for me, 105, 106. Like you said, that was even a bigger gap for you. You had 104, 108, but we're obviously on different ends of the spectrum there. So comment down below. Do you love the ceiling of Jefferson, or do you like the safe projection of Amon-Ra St. Brown?
You say that like St. Brown has no ceiling.
He's got a great ceiling
because
he ain't got the ceiling of Jefferson
formats. St. Brown and Jefferson's reception yardage totals are very, very projectably similar.
Yardage totals are not similar if they're hitting their upper percentile ceilings.
That's fair. Again, let's move on to the running backs before we go too long on this video.
Sorry. Again, this is passion.
I will totally take these guys over Jefferson in a vacuum if I have to make the decision on the clock right now. That is where I'm at with them. Again, you could think that's totally outlandish.
It is.
All you want. Bijan Robinson is an elite player. He has not had an elite season yet. Obviously, the history is on the side of Justin Jefferson, but he has elite target upside, 100-plus target upside at the running back position. He has workhorse size, breakaway speed, the best running back prospect that I have ever seen. Risk factors that held him back are gone. Arthur Smith in Pittsburgh. Number 2 risk factor that held him back, Desmond Ridder, Taylor Heineke, all the guys that couldn't get him into the red zone, so Arthur Smith couldn't feed him the football, also gone. Kirk Cousins, the aforementioned quarterback, coming in. Even if he's not right, you have Michael Penix behind him. So you got double quarterback proof for Bijan Robinson, and the offensive coordinator, Zach Robinson, coming in, going to run a Ram-style scheme, pass-heavy, up-tempo, going to use their running backs as a workhorse. They always have in Los Angeles, and they use their running backs in the red zone a ton. So for me, I look at Bijan Robinson, and if you told me right now he is pound for pound one of the best 3 running back talents in the NFL, which I believe he is,
I agree.
Everything else will fall into place. Everything else will fall into line, and we could be talking about the 2018 Todd Gurley. We could be talking about the 2019 Christian McCaffrey type of season for him.
Yeah, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head. Bijan Robinson, spoiler alert, was my RB2 for the longest time. I actually recently made the move to switch him to RB3. We'll get to the other guy in a second, but pretty much, like you said, you covered all the bases. Second-year running back, generational talent, top 10 overall draft pick, great run scheme, great potential volume. I mean, they're already talking about the fact this guy's literally going to be the CMC of their scheme. There's not much negative to point away when it comes to Bijan.
Better offensive line than Breece Hall, too, which is the tiebreaker between the two of them for me. That's the only reason Bijan is still ahead.
I'll get into the tiebreaker for me in a second, but so just breaking through, by the way. So CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Christian McCaffrey, Jahmyr Chase, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Bijan, Jefferson. So this is literally, we're at 108 right now for both of us, correct? All right. So technically speaking, this is our 108 overall, but this is actually currently my 107. Like I said, I ended up making the switch. Breece Hall, running back, New York Jets, ADP 108. I moved him to 107. Like you said, you have him at your 108. Like you said, it's an extremely close call between 2 absurd talents that can break fantasy. But While both have, extremely high 20 touch per game and good offense level projections and elite league winner level ceilings, I would really argue to the fact that you mentioned that you feel safer about the floor of Bijan with the backup quarterback with Penix there, with a better offensive line. I would argue that if the Jets hit their floor, which we literally saw last year, Breece Hall, week 5 on, after he came back from the, early wear and tear coming back from that knee injury, averaged 19.3 PPR points per game, despite horrific offensive line play, horrific overall offensive conditions. Breece Hall and Garrett Wilson were the lone bright spots in the entirety of that Jets offense last year. And the biggest reason why I love Breece Hall, again, we know what he's able to do as a runner. Big explosive ability, goal line size. Like, as a pure runner, we know what he brings to the table, but what we were able to see from him as a receiver last year, I don't think is even being talked about enough. He was an elite receiving back in the NFL last year. 90 targets, 88.9 PFF receiving grade, second and first respectively amongst NFL running backs in 2023. On top of that, 1.76 yards per route run, which was third best in the entirety of the NFL. Yes, I understand just how alluring Bijan Robinson is, but when you're breaking down what Breece Hall was able to do last year, having Rodgers now, again, we'll talk about it in a second when we get into Garrett Wilson, 5th highest EPA per play between 2018 and 2022. We just need him to be fully healthy to unlock that top end ceiling of this offense. Not to mention, like I said, the floor outcome, 19.3 fantasy points per game. I honestly view as the floor for Breece Hall this year, to be quite frank. I would be shocked if he produced less than he did down the stretch last year, where he was quite literally the RB3 in fantasy football. Again, both great options. The tiebreaker for me also has to do with the fact that despite drafting, Braylon Allen, Isaiah Davis in the draft, I do fear more of a guy like Tyler Algier comparatively to those guys. Again, very nitpicky. I still love both these guys, 107 and 108 respectively. But to me, Breece Hall, like you said, with Amon-Ra St. Brown maybe being the safer bet at the wide receiver position, I personally view Breece Hall, given the fact what he was able to do last year, being the safer bet between the two running backs.
Yeah, I don't disagree with anything you said. I think he is the safer bet. I actually think he's a better running back right now today than Bijan Robinson is. I think he's a better talent. But to me, the coaching as well, Nathaniel Hackett calling the offense versus Zach Robinson calling the offense is another risk in Bijan or in Breece Hall's against him, because he didn't use Breece Hall in the red zone last year because he's incompetent. He's a terrible offensive coordinator. They have a better offensive line definitely than last year. It was a train wreck last year, but it's still not as good as Atlanta's, in my opinion. And if Aaron Rodgers is not an elite quarterback, which is what he was last time we saw him, there's no backup plan for that. There's no Michael Penix Jr. sitting behind him, or if he's just hurt because he's coming off an Achilles tear and he's 40 years old. There's no backup plan. And not to mention, they're going to be very stubborn if Aaron Rodgers is not playing well to let him continue to throw the ball and let him continue to let Nathaniel Hackett call the offense and not fire their OC. Again, I get it. Breece Hall was still great. Doesn't matter what happens. He was still
That's what it comes down
at a high
to
level. But I'm comparing the bar for Bijan this year for his floor this year and Breece Hall's floor this year as Breece was great on his floor last year, but Bijan's floor is higher.
Do you think Bijan's floor is higher than 19.3 PPR points per game?
Not necessarily from a fantasy production standpoint, but what it looks like. And the fantasy production could fluctuate because, again, Breece Hall does run hot on these breakaway touchdowns, and that obviously contributes to a lot of it. Yeah. What happens if he doesn't catch as many passes this year? There's a lot of factors and variables that could factor in. Regardless, I feel so great about both of these guys. It's the reason that I actually feel comfortable fading Justin Jefferson. That should tell you how much I love both of these guys.
Yeah, well, the last thing I will fight back is you said, if the receiving production goes down, he was doing 19.3 PPR points per game on only 12.83 carries.
Well, he led all running backs in targets. So
no, 100%.
Again, literally did actually have his ceiling in terms.
I get that, but I would argue even if he went down a little bit in the receiving game, he was only averaging 12.83 carries per game, even in his healthy stretch. With Aaron Rodgers healthy, positive game scripts, this is a guy that can handle 17, 18 carries per game. So I'd argue again, I still think he could be an elite receiving talent. Again, the PFF grade, the yards per route run. I still think he could be an 80 plus, 85 plus target receiver, especially when you look at the complexion of the Jets receiving talent outside of Garrett Wilson. There's a lot of unknown in that core. The thing to me, though, is that if Aaron Rodgers is anywhere close to what we've seen in his prime, we're legitimately looking at a guy that can also punch in 15 touchdowns. Again, you mentioned legendary scenario for both these guys. That is the underlying factor here. We're talking about guys available at the 107, 108 that have legitimate 25 PPR point per game ceilings.
You're right, but Nathaniel Hackett also never ran him in the red zone last year, and if Aaron Rodgers is healthy, they're going to throw in the red zone. So there's a very good chance that Breece Hall doesn't have the same amount of red zone touches that Bijan has this year, because the Rams scheme and Kirk Cousins' offenses have notoriously been very run heavy in the red zone.
For sure. I mean, at the end of the day, we'll see both these players take that next step up. It's just, for me personally, we saw the floor outcome for Breece Hall be 19.3 PPR points per game.
Yeah, that's fair. And Bijan's floor outcome was what, 15.5, but he was a rookie last year.
Oh, 100%.
So that's the other thing. And he had a way worse, situation, all that kind of stuff. So let's move on to the final tier of guys here. We got the 1-2 turn picks. Try and wrap it up a little bit faster here. Garrett Wilson, AJ Brown, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Puka Nacua. I would say there's a distinct disadvantage to pick from this area.
You don't
of the
want
draft
pick 9
versus the top 8. You want a top 8 pick this year if you're taking anything away from this video. Let's talk about a second New York Jet in the top 10, which makes me nervous with Garrett Wilson.
Yeah, so he's my 109, ADP 111. Where do you have him ranked?
109, right? Also, he's the right line on that.
Okay, so I mean, I'll just start it off, and then you can add as well. But with Garrett Wilson, the same breakout case he had going into 2023 basically remains intact. Again, everything we were saying about him last offseason going into his second year remains the same case. Potentially one of the best wide receiver talents in the NFL, has suffered from horrific quarterback play, now is expected to get Aaron Rodgers added to the offense. Again, same case we made last year. Aaron Rodgers obviously gets hurt in week 1. Now we just say this year, okay, you know what? He's on track to play in week 1 this year. Again, more concern. I'll get into that in the later portion as to why, quite frankly, if we knew Aaron Rodgers was fully healthy, you can make the case he's the 9th, a part of that mid-first tier. But I digress. I'll get into that into a second. Wilson has commanded the 3rd most targets in a wide receiver's first 2 seasons of all time. The only 2 wide receivers to command more targets in their first 2 seasons, Marvin Harrison Sr. at 362, Jimmy Smith at 322. You see right there, Garrett Wilson at 315 with the 3rd most. Had of guys like Chris Carter, Rod Smith, Musa Muhammad, Justin Jefferson, Odell Beckham Jr., Keenan McCardle, Larry Fitzgerald. We're talking about elite territory of target commanding ability that Wilson is amongst. On top of that, he is an elite separator, posting elite postings on reception perception in his second season. 96th percentile against man, 79th percentile against zone, 93rd percentile against press. And on top of that, like I said, having Rodgers back is such a significant upgrade. A quarterback who's posted the 5th highest EPA per play between 2018 and 2022. Again, is that to say that Aaron Rodgers will get back to that MVP, back-to-back MVP level? Not necessarily. However, showing the overall scope of that 5-year landscape, we see that a healthy Rodgers will do wonders for Garrett Wilson's bottom line. This really feels similar to the CeeDee Lamb breakout case a couple years ago, where both are elite young talents. They needed a certain variable change. For CeeDee Lamb, it was the trade of Amari Cooper. For obviously Garrett Wilson, it's the health of Aaron Rodgers to hit that overall ceiling that we saw CeeDee Lamb develop into. And like I said with Wilson, I think we're in store for a monster year. I can see him really taking that next step, developing into a 1,400-yard, 12-plus touchdown receiver. It's just the only risk here, of course, is the Achilles of Aaron Rodgers. 41-year-old quarterback coming off of an injury that has been detrimental to so many other names that are much younger than him in the NFL past. That is the concern. However, I will say with the signing of Tyrod Taylor, I do feel a lot more at ease because, quite frankly, I just made the case that Aaron Rodgers would be by far the best quarterback that Garrett Wilson has ever played with. Tyrod Taylor would also be the best quarterback that Garrett Wilson has ever played with.
You've seen Tyrod Taylor the last 4 years, right? He's completely.
Have you seen Zach Wilson?
I have, but Tyrod Taylor is not the upgrade that you're selling him as.
We're making the case for why Aaron Rodgers is there, but all I'm saying is that even in the absolute downside scenario, it won't be as bad as last year because Zach Wilson, as bad as
You're right. It won't be, but it'll still be equally bad, I think, to be honest.
Maybe. I mean,
anyway, Garrett Wilson,
the case with Aaron Rodgers.
I actually think Garrett Wilson might be in a tier of his own behind these guys, just because I view Garrett Wilson, if Rodgers is right, as a better projection than Justin Jefferson. I do. I think Jefferson's a much better player than him. Don't get me wrong. But if Garrett Wilson, you just mentioned, he's got more targets through 2 years than Justin Jefferson had. Garrett Wilson with a great quarterback like Aaron Rodgers, a great quarterback, mind you, who is a wide receiver kingmaker for fantasy football. We've seen what he's done for Jordy Nelson, Devontae Adams, all these dudes. He feeds his dude early, often, when it means the most down the field and when it means the most in the red zone. Garrett Wilson could have 1,500 yards and 15 touchdowns this year, and it would not shock me one bit. So Garrett Wilson, to me, if you have a late first round pick, he is target number one for me.
I completely agree. Like I said, he's both of our 109s. I believe earlier in the offseason, you had him a little bit lower. So I'm glad you're on the same page with, quite frankly, with Garrett Wilson. Again, if Aaron Rodgers is right, I know I just mentioned the Tyrod Taylor bear case scenario. Again, I do think he has a higher floor because of Tyrod Taylor comparatively to Zach Wilson. But the reason why you're taking him in the first round, the reason why you're taking him potentially where we are at the 109 is with a healthy Aaron Rodgers. Because quite frankly, the way you should be approaching this late first round is, how do I get a player that can go toe-to-toe with the top 8 players in ADP this year?
Yeah, and Garrett Wilson is the guy that ceiling, and like, again, I think his floor is relatively high too. Even if Rodgers is not quite the same player, but he's healthy, he's still probably like a 17, 18 point per game guy. But yeah, the floor and ceiling combination of Garrett Wilson, like, he is basically green across the board in the entire risk ratings thing, because like CeeDee Lamb, he is very clearly the number one receiver of his team. There's no one even remotely close to him. And the next closest guy is his like backfield, like Breece Hall is the next best receiver on his team. So Garrett Wilson, absolutely one of the dudes that you need to be clicking the button on in the late first round. AJ Brown is my 110. I think he's your 110 as well, potentially. AJ Brown is just a superstar talent, big plays, spike weeks, elite target shares. Do you know how difficult it is to have a 30% target share on the same field as Devontae Smith? Like, that is extremely hard to do. Devontae Smith is a stud, man. He is a top 15 receiver in the league. And the fact that AJ Brown can alpha him that hard is super impressive to me. The Eagles might throw the ball more. That is why I have AJ Brown at 110. That is the only reason, because AJ Brown projects no differently than he has in years past. The only difference is that Kellen Moore is coming in, who has led top 5 pass rate offenses all of the last 5 years. And the Eagles were 21st and 23rd in pass attempts the last 2 seasons that AJ Brown has been there, 8th lowest in pass rate over expected in neutral game scripts as well. Kellen Moore might not be the best offensive coordinator in the world in terms of like schematics and that kind of thing, but man, does he throw the football.
Yeah, can't concur. But all jokes aside, again, my biggest question mark is, will Jalen Hurts step up to the table in a higher passing volume offense? Again, we know what he represents in fantasy, 15 rushing touchdowns last year. The only thing is, we haven't really fully seen him unlock that passing upside, mostly due to the volume of the offense, like you said. Again, is it more so a Jalen Hurts issue, or is it more so just the pass offense coordinator simply we're not calling enough passing volume? But regardless, if you're just specifically talking about talent, I'd make the case that AJ Brown is a no doubt top 5 talent at the wide receiver position. Like you said, before the Eagles collapse, again, this was a team that, started, I believe, 10-2, 11-1, went into that Niners game. It was, viewed as the battle of the 2 best teams in the NFL. Obviously, one team held up their end of the bargain there with the 49ers. The Eagles, unfortunately, ended up collapsing in the back end of the year. But prior to that collapse, AJ Brown was having one of the best wide receiver seasons we've seen in quite recent time. 45.8 receiving yards market share of the offense, 45.8%. Again, like you said, on an offense with Devontae Smith, on an offense with, Dallas Goedert at tight end, he was still able to produce 45.8% of their receiving yards this past season in that stretch. 20 PPR points per game, 93.36% snap share. This was a guy that was getting 2.567 yards per route run. He's just such a freak overall talent that if we do see the volume uptick, he's one of the guys that can finish as the 101 overall. And simply put, again, baseline projection, if they pass anywhere close to where they were last year, that's probably not in his range of outcomes. But like you said, you're baking in the fact that if they inherently throw the ball more, if Jalen Hurts does take the next step as a quarterback, again, still a young quarterback dealing with some offensive coordinator turnover, maybe Kellen Moore, given the volume of the offense we can expect, helps enable the next step for the passing volume in this offense. Again, you'll hear the anti-case when it comes to Devontae Smith later on, because, I just pointed out the fact that A.J. Brown is a clear alpha in this offense. But like you said, if I'm going to be lower on Devontae Smith, I have to have A.J. Brown at least in line with ADP.
Yeah, you're not going to hear a lower on Devontae Smith case for me, because I have him at ADP. So I have on board. I just think both of these guys are that good. And I think the offense will be very consolidated, as we know, with the Philadelphia Eagles. If we get 2022 Jalen Hurts as a passer, but with more volume, then AJ Brown absolutely has top 3, top 5 upside. He was, what do you have, like 6 games in a row over 125 receiving yards? Like, he was outstanding at the beginning of last year.
20 PPR points per game between weeks 1 and 12. And if you just solely isolated it to weeks 1 to 9, it was even better. Because again, the last couple of games he had there, 4 targets, 9 targets, was only able to produce 1 catch for 8 yards, no touchdowns, 5 catches, 37 yards, 1 touchdown. Even with those 2 games, weeks 11 and 12, that's still a 20 PPR point per game sample size. So the ceiling, like you said, absolutely there with AJ.
Yeah. So let's talk about Jahmyr Gibbs, who finds himself as the RB4, I guess, in our rankings, probably like a mini tier between him and the guys below him. And then obviously the guys ahead of him with Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, and Christian McCaffrey. The major risk for me on Jahmyr Gibbs, and I have cooled on him a little bit because as you kind of mentioned already, I thought he was a better projection than Garrett Wilson and AJ Brown were, but I do have him slightly behind those guys at 11 now. Montgomery could very well steal half or potentially more than half of the valuable rushing attempts in this offense, which in an offense that's this good are the goal line opportunities and are the red zone opportunities. Gibbs is a special back, 5.2 yards per carry as a rookie last year, RB8 in points per game, despite splitting a backfield, 71 targets his rookie season. Betting on second-year running backs is generally a very good heuristic to follow in fantasy football. It's good to bet on guys that we are concerned about their volume, but because they're young running backs, it's usually a slam dunk. They're going to get more their second year. 9 of the last 2. Well, yeah, exactly. 9 of the last 10 times that we've seen a workload increase that was very, very sizable and resulted in league winners. As you guys can see, Ryan Heath tweeted this out. It's been a second-year running back. It's been James Conner in 2018, Kyron Williams last year, Melvin Gordon in 2016. Like running backs who have big workload increases, it is usually second-year guys. And a lot of the times, there's other guys in their backfield we're worried about. Kyron Williams, we were drafting Cam Akers way higher than him. David Johnson had backfield competition that year. Rashad White, we were worried about how much work he was going to get. Alvin Kamara had Mark Ingram in his backfield. Like there's dudes that are good running backs, like David Montgomery is a good running back, that just get usurped by a second-year running back. That's just what happens. And it's caused me to reevaluate my stance on a guy like Devon Achane, how me and you have gone back and forth on those type of dudes. But Jahmyr Gibbs is the type of guy that I'm just willing to bet on. Yeah, like the projection's not as clean as it should be, but it's still very good.
Yeah, and don't worry, we will be talking more on Devon Achane in the next video with the second round. But yeah, you covered your bases on Jahmyr Gibbs. This was a guy that when he came back from injury, again, got hurt. Slow start of the season, missed a couple games, weeks 5 and 6. Week 7 on, this was a 19.4 PPR point per game running back, which would have ranked as the RB3 in that stretch. 73.6 rushing yards per game. He was doing it on 18.2 opportunities per game. And fun fact about this, it's not like the receiving production was carrying him here. Again, he profiles as a stud receiving back, but in that stretch, it was more so the rushing work. It was more so the big plays. As a receiver, he only averaged 3.8 receptions per game and 24.6 receiving yards. So we can even see that take the next leap once he's fully confident in the offense. Again, we saw the rushing game fully translate. He's got way more to chew when it comes to the receiving game because, quite frankly, he profiled as the 12th overall pick to be an elite receiving back in the NFL, and I still feel like that ability is there for Jahmyr Gibbs.
Yeah, he was downright inefficient as a receiver last year. It wasn't even just that he could be better. It's that he was actually bad as a receiver. So he, like you said, has a lot left that he could do as a receiving back. I don't think he's actually a bad receiving back. I think he just got unlucky and ran cold. Maybe the types of targets he was getting, there was a linebacker spying him or something. I don't know all the context to his targets, but it's definitely possible he is a much better receiving back this year.
And I mean, the other factor contextually that may have played into it, like you said, is that he's split in the backfield so much as a rookie running back with David Montgomery to the point that when he came into the game, teams kind of figured, hey, he's probably getting schemed open a target here. Maybe I should send, like you said, a spy linebacker, a spy nickel, a spy, inside the box safety to make sure Jahmyr Gibbs doesn't get going. Because, I mean, he was used with a variety of route diet. Like we saw him, running, angle routes out of the backfield, Texas routes. You were able to see him run to the flats. We were able to see him use in a variety of ways. It's just, it almost felt like when he came into the game, defenses almost expected him to be used in that way.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention, too, when you're a rookie, sometimes the game needs to slow down for you, and maybe the receiving scheme was something that he just wasn't grasping as quickly mentally as he needed to do. And that's where we're so shocked by these second-year running backs when they just look so much better in their second year. A lot of it is the mental side of the game slowed down for them. So let's talk about our consensus 112, the final player that we have. And spoiler alert, he is my 113 or my 201. So I don't actually have him in my first round, but you have him at 111, I believe. So that's why he is in here. Puka Nacua, I'll let you make the case for him. And then I can talk briefly about our honorable mention. We'll go into my honorable mention more in the second round when we break into it, but I'll just mention why I have him ahead of Puka, basically.
So for context, again, I have Puka at 11. You have him at 13. Consensus has him as the ADP 110. The guy that is your 112, again, we'll talk about him in a second. I'm not going to spoil the name. I actually have as my 13th overall player. So he would have been the first player I talked about on the second round video. But with Puka Nacua, again, I have him, one spot below consensus. It's just hard to deny that typically when a rookie receiver tells you they're extremely good, we should just listen to them, because we can make excuses about, Cup missed time, Puka isn't an explosive player, etc., yada, yada, yada. I don't care. He commands volume. He produces fantasy points. We saw him produce, including the playoff game. So 18 total games played this year as an elite wide receiver in the NFL. 163 targets, 1,667 receiving yards, 89.3 PFF grade, which ranked 10th league-wide, on top of 2.75 yards per route run. Again, this day 3 wide receiver steps into the NFL and already produces like a top 10 guy at his position. Instead of trying to poke holes into what Puka did, we should just be focusing on the fact that he posted the 3rd highest yards per game in a rookie season since the AFL-NFL merger. And outside of Michael Clayton, every single one of these guys ended up being a stud wide receiver. Odell Beckham Jr., Justin Jefferson, Anquan Bolden, Jamar Chase, Randy Moss, Michael Thomas, Terry Glenn, Marcus Colson were all stud NFL wide receivers, and I do believe Puka is next up. If Puka's name was Jackson Smith and Jigba and he had first-round capital with the season he just had, we'd be talking about him in a different light holistically. Again, I understand the concern. I love Cooper Kupp. If he's healthy, he's a stud receiver in his own right, and I fully understand the aspect of maybe he dents Puka's target share, but that would be downplaying Puka's season and assuming that anybody would be alphaing Puka Nacua. And again, I like Kupp quite a bit. We will talk about Kupp in a future video. Both of us love Cooper Kupp this year, but the way I view this shaping out is that the Rams are operating an extremely consolidated target hierarchy between these two stud wide receivers. If we talked about after the season that these guys combined for a legitimate 60+% target share, I don't think anybody would be surprised. That is the level of talent that both Puka and Kupp represent, and that is the level of consolidated target share in this offense. Not really a big-time threat at tight end. Again, Colby Parkinson was signed to a pretty big contract, but it's not like we're expecting this guy to be a 100-target tight end. And although I like the running backs out of the backfield with Kyron and Blake Corum, it's not like you have a Kamara and McCaffrey. I mean, we just talked about Breece Hall having 90 targets. It's not like you're having a guy that you can expect to consistently have 80+, 90+ targets. And on top of that, Stafford, when healthy this past season, led the league in big-time throw rate amongst qualified options and had the 4th highest PFF passing grade in the entire NFL. On top of that, as we know with Matthew Stafford, he has been the wide receiver kingmaker in fantasy. So while I do technically have him below ADP, again, he's my 111, he's ADP's 110, I'm still quite in on Puka. And if you have a 111, 112 turn pick, I would absolutely feel comfortable taking him as the first pick on that turn.
So I'm going to make the case against Puka Nacua because I do have Marvin Harrison Jr. ahead of him. And I just want to preface it right off the top with this. The Los Angeles Rams are easily the worst team that I've been able to project over the years of being a fantasy football analyst. I've been so wrong on the backfield for so many years. I've been wrong on, I did really love Cooper Kupp before his 2021 season. So I guess I got that one right, but that was like pretty much the only time. But I was dead wrong on their projection last year. I didn't think they were going to be a good team at all. They obviously break the bank, have the 2 biggest league winners in all of fantasy. This year, I just think they're a little bit overvalued. I think that there's a chance that they're not quite as good as they were last year. And part of it is because Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, to me, are a lot closer to 1A, 1B than they are to a clear alpha and a clear second wide receiver. So I do like Puka Nacua a little bit less than the market, but I have him at 201. So I'm still absolutely comfortable taking him with an early second rounder. Here's why I have Marvin ahead of him. Let's imagine for a second here that Marvin Harrison Jr. is exactly who we all know he is, which is the best wide receiver prospect we've all ever seen. It's very hard to admit that in the moment, but I have never seen a better wide receiver prospect. Jamar Chase, Amari Cooper, Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson. I think Marvin is better than all of them as a wide receiver prospect. He was an elite route runner, elite producer, elite pedigree, elite athlete. There is nothing you can poke holes in his game. People have a hard time saying that he is the best wide receiver prospect they've ever seen in the moment, but they are going to say it the second he is producing on an NFL field. If he is a stud like Jamar Chase was as a rookie, this coaching staff in Arizona, produced the 24th highest scoring unit with the worst offensive supporting cast I've ever seen in my life, and Joshua Dobbs playing quarterback for most of the year. I think they can elevate once they have Kyler Murray healthy, once they have Marvin Harrison Jr. in town, and DeAndre Hopkins, when Kyler Murray had him on the field, was a 10 target per game guy. So I look at the way that Marvin Harrison commanded targets in college. I look at the way that Kyler Murray has used the number one wide receiver before. And Kyler Murray, when healthy, has been an MVP candidate caliber quarterback in years past. Offense, in my opinion, is the best it's ever been. You have McBride, you have Connor and Benson, you have Michael Wilson maybe takes a step this year. And in 8 games, Kyler played last year, they averaged 33.5 pass attempts, which was about league average as far as pass volume in the NFL. I have him over Puka for these reasons. Even though it's a projection as an ability wise, like obviously Puka Nacua had the best rookie season in terms of yardage that we've ever seen. He is clearly the safer floor projection as a talent. I believe that Marvin Harrison Jr. right now is a better wide receiver than Puka Nacua, as crazy as that sounds. Cooper Kupp is a significant threat to Puka Nacua's volume, more so than McBride and the other guys are to Marvin Harrison's, in my opinion. And even though I believe Puka Nacua is the number one wide receiver in that offense, Marvin Harrison is a height, weight, speed freak who will affect the red zone and the deep areas of the field more than Puka Nacua does. Puka Nacua's ADOT was 9.1 yards last year. That's 75th among all wide receivers. He only had 19 deep targets last year, which was 26th among wide receivers, even though he was 7th in overall targets. And he was 20th in red zone targets, again, despite having the 7th most targets overall. I think that he's a great receiver. I just think he ran super, super hot last year on yaks, on big plays, and that kind of thing. I love Puka. I think he's going to be a great pick this year. I just think that we've seen the best season of his career so far.
Yeah, but I mean, at the same time, again, this is not anti-Harrison for the record. I love Marvin Harrison Jr. He is literally my 13th overall player. I would personally, as my second pick at the 201, absolutely smash the draft button on Marvin Harrison Jr. But I do feel like
draft both of these guys for what it's
100%,
which is a nice thing. You can take both of them.
Yeah, it's just if I had to make a decision of one or the other, it just feels like I'm jumping the gun, putting him over Puka Nacua, because I will counter again. You mentioned, the lack of big plays. This is still a guy that, in terms of 20+ yard receptions, was up there with some of the best receivers in the league this past season. Not to mention when Matthew
Stafford,
not
air yards though, they were yak plays, which are sometimes not sticky year over year.
But that's the type of player that Puka Nacua is, a yak wide receiver. We saw that on display this past year. Similar to, we mentioned Amon-Ra St. Brown earlier on. I don't think they all project all that differently in terms of player archetype. Now, obviously, the reason why Amon-Ra's higher is there's no cup on Detroit. There's a cup on LA. Again, that is not to say that Cooper Kupp is a bad football player. It's more so to say that I think Puka Nacua entering his second year could end up being the alpha of this team, and also having full faith with Matthew Stafford as the quarterback. This is a guy that the last time we fully saw him healthy, again, missed 8 games in 2022, missed a couple games last year, also played a couple games hurt. Again, one game where he had 68% of the snaps against the Cowboys, hurt his hand in that game, left early, blowout game in that game. The last time we saw him fully healthy, again, in that 2021 campaign, yes, is it a little bit of a projection to say Stafford will get fully back to that 41 passing touchdown level? Sure. But the fact that he has the ability to get to that level points me in a direction that the overall passing ceiling of this offense is comparatively higher to the Arizona Cardinals. On top of that, like you said, in that year, 601 pass attempts for the Rams. Even last year, despite playing basically 14 and a half games, 521 pass attempts. So when Matthew Stafford is healthy, this is a team that will still throw the football. And on top of that, like I said, in 18 games he played, including the playoff game, 163 targets in his rookie season. So again, this is not an anti-Marvin Harrison Jr.'s take. It's more so just we saw Puka be so dominant last year in his rookie season. It's kind of feeling like we're jumping the gun, putting a rookie over what we saw from Puka Nacua already, because he was the rookie last year that was able to produce. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I guess just my assumption is that if we're taking Harrison this high to begin with, we should just go off of his baseline projection. That if we're assuming he's elite, we should just go off of that, because you made the case at the top of the board here for CeeDee Lamb being the clear alpha of his offense. I made the case for St. Brown being the clear alpha of his offense. Garrett Wilson, clear alpha of his offense. If Harrison is the player that we all think he's going to be, he is going to be the clear alpha of this offense.
Yeah, no, that's definitely fair. And for the record, this is the reason why I have Marv over. I'll give you guys some sneak peek as the guys in the next round. I have Marvin Harrison Jr. ranked over Nico Collins, Drake London, Brendan Ayuk, Saquon Barkley, Devon Achane, Jonathan Taylor, Jalen Waddle, all of those second round names because of that case you made. If he is the alpha of that Cardinals offense that we think he can be, he's got a legitimate top 3 to 5 ceiling in fantasy. Again, I fully recognize that. Puka Nacua is the line at wide receiver that I can't cross him over.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, if you guys are just coming back to the scene and wondering why the hell we're talking about Marvin this high, well, this is where his ADP is, by the way, at 13th overall. We have him 12, 13. That's where his ADP is. The Sharps are drafting him this high. So it's not like we're jumping the gun entirely when all of the money and all of the data is saying that everybody believes he's this good and everybody believes he should be going this high. So all I'm saying is that if we all believe that to be true, then we should just project him as if he's already an elite wide receiver.
For sure. Again, like Puka Nacua is the one name that is the line. Because again, like I said, once you get to Nico, Drake London, Brandon Ayuk, all have their concerns. I'm perfectly fine putting Marvin at the top of that tier.
Yeah. For me, I relied a lot on how these guys project as far as their downside risk, their median outcomes, and then their overall ceilings, which is why I got to having Jefferson lower than you did, why I got to having Nacua lower than you did, and why I got to Garrett Wilson and St. Brown and CeeDee Lamb as guys and Tyreek Hill as guys that I'm just so enamored with this year, guys that I feel so good about.
Vice versa for me as well. I really took time making these notes, really fine-toothing this process. Again, we want to get you guys the best content available out there, and I felt like if you guys made it through the entirety of this video, you got a ton of value from it because we had some fiery debates. We had some, on the clock decision type of debates because ultimately here, if you're not getting passionate about the player and the pick at those current slots, you don't have any conviction, and you need conviction at this point of your fantasy drafts.
Yeah, and this is we can all just rank these players and be like, oh, they're all similar, throw them in a hat. It's like you actually have to make a decision on the clock. Yes. So that's why we went through and fine-tooth combed. How is this guy fail? How does this guy hit? What does the ceiling look like when he hits? What does the floor look like when he fails? That is why we went. This is probably the most in-depth wide receiver. Oh, yeah. Probably the most in-depth first-round video you'll ever watch is because we absolutely had to go through everything under the sun with all of these players. Like, are we sure this guy should be higher? Is this guy supposed to be higher? Like, we had to do that because this is the pick that matters the most. Of all the fantasy draft picks that you're going to have, this is the one that will kill you the most if you miss on it.
Yeah, absolutely. You can, despite what the common narrative is, you can absolutely both win and lose your fantasy league based on the goddamn button you press in the first round.
Yeah, no, absolutely. People who drafted Devontae Adams at the end of the first round last year probably didn't win
over CeeDee Lamb.
League. Yeah, exactly. People who drafted CeeDee Lamb at the end of the first round last year or Christian McCaffrey in the first round last year probably did win their fantasy championship. So very long video. If you guys made it all the way to the end, go ahead, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel. If you're new around here, as you've seen on the screen throughout this entire video, risk ratings, truth series, we've broken down everything that we have in our draft guide on these first round players, and we got them for way more players than that. You can get our draft guide totally for free by signing up on Underdog Fantasy with a $10 sign up and first deposit with promo code FSE. When you sign up with $10, they'll match your deposit up to $250, and they'll give you a special pick'em entry in your pick'em lobby. And our brand new contest, as I announced yesterday, is that me and Danny are going to send you 2 tickets to go see your favorite football team this year. One lucky winner from our promo code FSE users. Doesn't matter if you've used it already. If you used it last year, 2 years ago, you're still eligible for the giveaway. But if you want to be eligible and you haven't yet used it, taking the plunge on Underdog Fantasy, you can sign up using the promo code FSE, get our Dynasty Draft Guide, get our Redraft Guide, get our Dynasty Rookie Film Breakdown, see why I'm so enamored with Marvin Harrison Jr. on those. And that is available down below. Link in the pinned comment for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you want the perfect date, you want the perfect, time with your brother. I mean, go win those 2 tickets, man. I'm telling you right now, you will not regret entering for $10 to potentially have the chance to go to your favorite team's game.
Yeah, and you get 3 draft guides basically out of it, and you can't even get a Big Mac combo for $10 anymore at McDonald's. So yeah, that'll be linked down below in the description. Again, appreciate you guys for making it to the end of this video. We will be doing this for round 2, round 3, and we have a ton of heaters coming this week, so you're definitely going to want to be subscribed to the channel if you are not already. So with that being said, peace out, and we'll talk to you soon.